Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. I'm recording some videos ahead of time while I'm on the Western Front in France filming content for Stories of the Great War. And this is a channel I don't believe I've ever reacted to before. He's got almost 32,000 subscribers. Love those opportunities to check out new channels and maybe shine a light on a hidden gem. And this one looks like it's an animated video called Every U.S. President's Weirdest Fact Explained in 21 Minutes. U.S. presidential history is some of the most popular content I do on this channel. So I always like to dive into that well, especially since it's a topic that I feel like I know quite a bit about. And my neighbors are setting off fireworks at 9:30 on August 31st. Okay. The link's down in the description. You can check out Agent Flappy without my commentary. I'm going to pause and start this up when they're done making noise.
From nude swimming, to wrestling beatdowns, to vomiting on foreign leaders. This is every U.S. president's weirdest fact.
So that'd be John Quincy Adams, Abraham Lincoln, and George H.W. Bush, I think.
And some of them are so bizarre, you'll be wondering how these guys even got elected in the first place. Like George Washington, a man whose dental problems were so horrific, he only had one real tooth left by the time he became president.
Yeah.
And no, despite the myth, his dentures weren't wooden. They were so much worse. They were a Frankenstein mix of human teeth, cow and horse teeth, hippopotamus ivory, and metal springs to keep it all together.
I mean, if you put yourself in position of being someone in the 18th century, what do you have to make dentures out of? You don't have the sophisticated tools that we have today to be able to measure all the things just right. And, you know, it was ridiculously uncomfortable. And he had a really tough time with it and would keep his mouth closed most of the time. And, was known to be a very quiet speaker anyway, and I wonder how much of that had to do with how much pain he was constantly in.
And this wasn't just uncomfortable. It was borderline torture. His dentures creaked, shifted, and made his jaw bulge so noticeably that he rarely smiled in portraits. But if you think that's scary, just wait till you meet John Adams' dog, Satan. Because Adams had two dogs at the White House. Juno, and...
Now, it's important to point out that John Adams only barely lived in the White House. He moved into it right at the end of his term in office. Thomas Jefferson is the first president to spend his entire presidency in the White House.
Satan. And to this day, no one knows why he gave one of them the most diabolical name imaginable. But historians theorize it's because Adams had a famously dry sense of humor.
He did.
So Satan was likely a chaotic little menace around the house. Imagine showing up to talk politics and getting barked at by Satan.
I mean, Satan's not anything compared to Andrew Jackson's parrot. I really hope we talk about that.
But even that's not as disturbing as Thomas Jefferson, who had a decades-long relationship with one of his slaves.
And I'm not going to get into this one again. I'm not going to debate with you people who think that Thomas Jefferson was not the father of Sally Hemings' children. It's not even worth my energy to debate that topic anymore.
This Jefferson fathered 6 children with Sally Hemings and never publicly acknowledged the relationship. However, thanks to modern DNA testing, we can now say with full Maury Povich confidence, you are the father. But it gets even more twisted. Sally Hemings was actually his wife's half-sister.
Sally was only 1/4 black. She was what was known as a quadroon. Her mother was half black, was a slave. Her father was the father of Jefferson's wife.
And Jefferson kept her and their kids enslaved after being born. Yep. That's absolutely insane, especially coming from the guy who wrote All Men Are Created Equal. But while Jefferson was tangled in contradictions, his political protege was sharp, serious, and pretty dang small. Cause James Madison stood at just 5'4" and barely cracked 100 pounds. The smallest president in US history. They called him Little Jimmy. But this little man was the chief architect of the Constitution, helped draft the Bill of Rights, and co-founded the Democratic-Republican Party. So
he is kind of, if you think of the modern two-party system having its roots during George Washington's term in office, You can really kind of say that Alexander Hamilton is the father of the Federalist Party, even though George Washington, who didn't claim membership in a party, kind of nominally on that side as well. But it's Hamilton, and then it's Jefferson and Madison on the other side. They're really kind of the main people behind those parties.
While he may have been a short king, James Madison left a massive legacy. But speaking of legacies, we can't forget James Monroe, the only U.S. president with a foreign capital named after him, Monrovia, Liberia. Yeah, all the way in Africa. Monroe supported resettling freed African Americans in West Africa rather than integrating them back into American society.
This was a pretty common idea that even Abraham Lincoln subscribed to during his term in office. The idea that people couldn't see a scenario in which, even with the end of slavery, that formerly enslaved African Americans could ever be truly equal with white people of European descent in America, and that it was best for both races if they just not be together. And so the idea of resettlement, Monrovia, Liberia set up for this, which is about as close as they could get to where their ancestral homeland would have been in the sub-Saharan Western Africa. There were people looking towards Central America and the Caribbean for places at different times.
In 1822, they named the capital Monrovia in his honor. But while some presidents enjoyed their own capital, other presidents enjoyed skinny dipping?
So one last thing about James Monroe. Very nearly the only American killed in action during the Battle of Trenton. No Americans were killed in action during the Battle of Trenton. There were a couple of deaths from exposure, but none from battle wounds. But Monroe, who was a young lieutenant at the battle, was very nearly killed, and it took a doctor heroically saving his life after he had been wounded.
Because every morning, John Quincy Adams would strip down and take a nude swim in the Potomac River. And in 1825, reporter Anne Royale
I'm so glad he's going to mention this. The first woman to ever get an interview with the president because she stole his clothes.
On his clothes while he was in the river and refused to move until he agreed to an interview, making John Quincy Adams the only president in history to be interviewed butt naked. Talk about I
don't know. I feel like LBJ would have been perfectly fine with that scenario.
Transparent administration. You're welcome. But if Adams was the kind of guy who skinny dipped at sunrise, Andrew Jackson was the kind of dude who'd shoot you before breakfast. Because Jackson was involved in over 100 duels. And in 1806, when lawyer Charles Dickinson insulted his wife, Jackson challenged him to a duel. But Dickinson fired first and struck Jackson in the chest. While still standing and bleeding out, Jackson calmly returned fire, killing Dickinson with a single shot. But after the chaos of Jackson...
And Jackson carried around, I think, some of these wounds and bullets for the rest of his life.
Martin Van Buren stepped in with polished boots, perfect hair, and a slogan that accidentally gave the world its favorite word. Okay. His nickname...
And he says the world because literally people in other languages say okay. I mean, it's very much a world thing now. Martin Van Buren's also the only president whose first language was not English.
Old Kinderhook became the rallying cry. Vote for okay. At the same time, Americans were spelling all correct like this. Put it all together and boom. We got the word okay.
I'm really impressed so far. He's getting the nuance of some of this stuff right, which is really good. Because okay there is some question about the exact origin of that, and he mentioned both of the possibilities.
But I wish someone asked this next president if he was okay.
Harrison?
Because William Henry Harrison had the shortest presidency, dying just 31 days into office from contaminated White House drinking water.
Excellent. A lot of people say, oh, it was because he gave the longest inaugural address in history and he did it without a hat and he stayed out and he got sick. No, it wasn't. This was a time in history when a lot of people were getting sick from Washington's water supply. And a lot of people were dying, and it wasn't just presidents. I mean, Polk ends up dying right after he leaves office. You have Zachary Taylor dying while he's in office. You had other members of Congress that got really sick and died. You had children of people who lived in Washington dying. It was a crappy time to be in Washington.
And during his brief stay, Harrison had an exotic pet goat that roamed the grounds and once headbutted a cabinet member. Ouch! Between the goat attacks and toxic water, William Henry Harrison's presidency was a short-term circus. Unlike this next guy, who kicked off the longest-running presidential bloodline in American history. Because John Tyler had 15 children, the most of any president. But here's the crazy part. Tyler was born in 1790, yet his grandchildren lived well into the 2010s.
He actually, up until a few months ago, still had a grandson living. He had 2 grandsons who lived well into the 2010s, and one of them literally just died. There was Lion Gardner Tyler and Harrison Tyler, I think was the other one. Chance to do the VTH drinking game. And if you haven't ever seen the VTH drinking game video, look it up. It's still out there. I'm going to mention ancestors. My kids are descended from Lion Gardner, who is the namesake of Lion Gardner Tyler, because John Tyler was married twice, and it was through his second wife, Julia Gardner, who was much younger than him, that he had children while he was very late in life. And then one of those children had children very late in life, which is how he got grandchildren living into the 2020s. Yeah, she's descended from that same Lion Gardner that my kids are descended from.
One passed away in 2020. How's that even possible?
So you kind of missed the one. The one just died this year in 2025.
Well, Tyler fathered his last child at 70, creating a direct family line from George Washington's era to the iPhone era.
Yeah, and you know who else has a similar story like this is Charles Dance, the actor who played Tywin Lannister in Game of Thrones. He has a daughter who is like pretty young, like I want to say like maybe a teenager, and he's in his 70s, and his father was born in like the 1870s. So this girl, born in what, the 2010s, her grandfather was born in the 1870s.
Not a family tree, that's a friggin' time machine. Get in, Doc, we're going back to 1845. Because James K. Polk was out here grinding like there's no tomorrow. After campaigning on being a one-term president, Polk kept his promise and powered through with strong coffee in 12 to 16-hour days. But sadly,
he's like, I got to get everything done I can in one term because I'm not running again.
103 days after leaving office, Polk died from illness and exhaustion.
Which probably happened because he was in Washington.
Giving him the shortest retirement of any U.S. president. We didn't even get to play golf. But after Polk came war hero Zachary Taylor, who moved into the White House and brought his beloved warhorse, Old Whitey, who turned into a fan favorite because visitors would pluck hairs from his tail as souvenirs, to the point where it eventually went bald. So White House staff had to step in to protect the horse. Until Zachary Taylor suddenly died from eating raw cherries. And Old Whitey reappeared, proudly marching in his funeral with his tail fully regrown. But
it wasn't the raw cherries directly, it was probably the water that they were washed in or something else that he had with it.
After Taylor went out on some stomach trouble, Millard Fillmore stepped in and had plumbing on the brain. Because for years, people claimed he installed the first bathtub in the White House.
So we're going to show William Howard Taft in the bathtub. We're going to talk about that.
But turns out, that's an urban myth. In reality, Fillmore had a love for libraries. Because when a massive fire broke out in the Library of Congress in 1851, he personally helped form a bucket brigade to save books from burning.
Awesome.
What a good Samaritan. Unlike Franklin Pierce, who was the only sitting president ever arrested. Well, allegedly.
I would debate that one a little bit. Ulysses S. Grant was technically arrested because he was stopped and he was detained for speeding while he was president. I think it happened twice.
'Cause in 1853, Pierce accidentally ran over an elderly woman with his carriage and was
This one's debated. There's some question about it.
arrested for reckless driving. Reckless carriaging? Horsing? I don't know.
He's probably drunk.
But here's the twist. There's no arrest record, no news coverage, and no mention in his personal letters. So, historians think the whole thing is a myth. But if you ask me, maybe the government swept it under the rug to protect Pierce's image. But hey, what do
Pierce did plenty to hurt his own image without having to worry about that.
I know? I'm just a bald eagle with top secret security clearance.
And he is actually related to Barbara Pierce Bush, the First Lady, who was also the mother of George W. Bush.
Speaking of presidential mysteries, James Buchanan's love life was quite the head-scratcher. 'Cause Buchanan was the only unmarried president. And his unusually close relationship with Senator William King really got people talking. Like Andrew Jackson, who called him Miss Nancy and Aunt Fancy. Were the two an item? No one really knows. But in
No,
private,
and you gotta remember that the idea of what's masculine and feminine and what's appropriate and what's acceptable have changed over time. And it wasn't uncommon at that time in history, for example, for two men to share a bed if they were rooming together. Abraham Lincoln did this for a long time. And people today who are, for whatever reason, looking for gay icons sometimes say, well, that means Abraham Lincoln must have been gay because he was sharing a bed. Or Alexander Hamilton was gay because of the letters that he wrote to John Lawrence. It's silly to speculate because even if it is true, there's no evidence to support it and we'll never know. And honestly, who cares?
letters, Buchanan did refer to King as his better half and my wife. But one thing that's not up for debate is Abe Lincoln's freakish athleticism.
Yep.
At 6 foot 4 inches, Lincoln was a wrestling champion who won 299 out of 300 matches. In 1831, 22-year-old Lincoln faced off against Jack Armstrong, leader of a local gang. And after a gritty back and forth, Lincoln slammed Armstrong to the ground, earning the gang's respect. And over a century later, Lincoln's legendary status was made official when he was inducted into the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1992.
And that one wrestling match that he is known to have lost, there's some speculation that there may have been cheating involved by his opponent to win that one.
Meanwhile, Andrew Johnson had fashion on the mind. Because before politics,
tailor.
Johnson worked as a tailor. And even after making it to the White House, cut and sewed one of his own inaugural suits by hand.
When he wasn't drunk, he was drunk at his swearing in as vice president. It was pretty embarrassing, really.
That's nothing compared to Ulysses S. Grant, who got pulled over for speeding 3 times during his presidency.
Yep.
Because Grant had a serious need for speed and loved racing down D.C. streets. In 1872, a police officer stopped him, not realizing he'd flagged down the president. But even after figuring it out, the officer still handed him a ticket.
It's impressive because by this point, you would think most people knew who Grant was. He was pretty much the most famous American on the planet, presidency or not.
Which makes Grant the first and only U.S. president with a moving violation. But after Grant galloped through D.C., Rutherford B. Hayes became the first U.S. president to pick up a telephone.
Yep.
Because Alexander Graham Bell assigned Hayes' phone number. 1. Imagine telling people your phone number is literally 1. But Hayes found the phone confusing and barely used it. When Bell called him up, Hayes said, "Great invention, but who would ever use one?" I think the answer turned out to be everyone.
Actually, I've actually been studying a little bit about this topic, only because I'm right now going through the book Destiny of the Republic, which I highly recommend, by the way. It follows the stories of President James Garfield and his assassin Charles Guiteau, and it's actually the book that the upcoming Netflix 4-part series Death by Lightning is based on. It looks fantastic. I'm really excited. It comes out in November. And that phrase "death by lightning" actually comes from a quote in the book attributed to Garfield, where he was addressing the concerns that people had over potential assassination. and he kind of compared it to death by lightning. It was just like there was nothing you could do to prevent it, really. And but one of the other stories that is covered in that book is Alexander Graham Bell, because he has a connection to all of that. And it's fascinating hearing about Bell's battles with hundreds of people who tried to claim the invention of the telephone, and he had to go to court repeatedly over these things.
But unlike Hayes, James Garfield had a bit more brain power and might have been the smartest man to ever sit in the Oval Office.
I think he was.
Because Garfield was an ambidextrous genius who could write Greek with one hand and Latin with the other at the same time.
And I actually was just at Garfield's house in Mentor, Ohio, which is about an hour away from me. Really, really cool. And you're going to get to see some of it. I was with my friend Matt Beat from the channel Mr. Beat. And I was there with him. He was making videos on William McKinley, on James Garfield, and I was there with him for both of those, and I should be appearing in both of those. But yeah, Garfield, brilliant guy, incredible speaker, was not trying to be president, and actually showed up at the 1880 Republican Convention to nominate Senator John Sherman of Ohio, the brother of William Tecumseh Sherman, as president. And when Sherman and James Blaine and a couple of other guys, none of them could get enough votes on more than 30 ballots, people finally said, well, you know what? Garfield, he's pretty impressive. He's a great speaker. Everybody likes him. He could be a compromise candidate. And on like the 33rd ballot, he got nominated, even though he wasn't trying to be president. Brilliant guy, great speaker. I think a very decent and moral person, and one of our great what ifs. If he had been president. And what they told us at the house was that Garfield was considered to be the first left-hand dominant president that we've had. Even though he was ambidextrous, he was left-hand dominant.
He's also the only president to publish an original mathematical proof of the Pythagorean theorem. Yep. What can't this guy do? But
brilliant,
it's hilarious that our most brilliant president was followed up by a guy who loved pants? Because Chester Arthur owned over 80 pairs of pants and changed outfits multiple times a day.
He did.
He took late-night strolls to window shop luxury clothes. And one reporter joked Arthur would rather lose a vote than a good tailor.
And he was dying during his presidency. He had Bright's disease, which was ultimately fatal, and hid it the best he could. And I give Arthur a lot of credit, too. He was a product of the spoils system, which was a dominant political issue at that time, and I'm sure that's going to be covered in Death by Lightning as well. And yet he took on the very system that created him in the first place.
But while Arthur was shopping for silk ties, Grover Cleveland was executing people. Before his presidency, Cleveland served as sheriff and twice acted as official hangman, personally pulling the lever on convicted murderers. And when others offered to handle the grim duty, Cleveland refused, wanting to spare them the guilt.
Yeah,
that's
he was sheriff of, I think, Erie County, New York, which is where Buffalo is.
Kinda wholesome, I think. But this also became campaign ammo for his opponents, who later mocked that he appeared mighty comfortable around a gallows. So instead of handling executions, our next president was handling dinner plates. Because Benjamin Harrison was William Henry Harrison's grandson.
Yep.
The only grandfather-grandson presidential duo. And when Benjamin took office, he used the same White House china his grandfather had purchased 48 years earlier.
Which is actually pretty cool when you think about it, and I hope he mentions the light switches.
However, Harrison joked that the only advantage of being related to a president was some old dinner plates. But for William McKinley...
So he didn't mention him, but Benjamin Harrison was president when they installed electricity in the White House. And he was so afraid of being electrocuted that he wouldn't touch the light switches to turn lights off and on.
His good luck charm wasn't inherited. It was the red carnation he always wore in his lapel.
The Ohio State flower, thank you very much. Because of him, the scarlet carnation.
Which he believed brought him good fortune. Until he took it off at an event, handed it to a little girl, and minutes later, bang. And the red carnation became Ohio State flower in his memory. But speaking of flying bullets, did you know Teddy Roosevelt gave an 84-minute speech with a bullet lodged in his chest?
And it wasn't like he had just had the bullet in there from a decade earlier. He had literally just been shot, and he started the speech by mentioning, I don't know if you're aware, but I've just been shot.
On the campaign trail, Teddy was shot at point-blank range. The bullet tore through his coat, eyeglass case, and a 50-page folded speech, which slowed the bullet just enough to spare his life. And with a bullet lodged near his rib, Roosevelt stood up and delivered an 84-minute speech before going to the hospital.
So he was actually, I think, in a car, and he was standing up in the car to kind of address the crowd on his way to the speech. So after he got shot, he went in to do the speech, so he wasn't like at the site of the speech already.
What a legend! But speaking of old legends,
Didn't happen.
most people think William Howard
happen.
Taft was so big he got stuck in a bathtub. Turns out that story's a total myth.
Actually, my favorite presidential bathtub story that is true is the fact that I'll wait until we get to Harry Truman in case it gets mentioned, but there was a situation where the White House was kind of falling apart, and it ends up being gutted during Truman's administration. I'm getting way ahead of myself, but he was in the bathtub when it nearly collapsed through the floor onto some women that were below it.
Taft did, however, install an extra-large custom bathtub big enough to fit 4 grown men. 'Cause at 340 pounds, the man needed a little room. But if you think that's wild, wait till you hear about the First Lady who quietly took over the country. Because in 1919, Woodrow Wilson suffered a stroke that left him paralyzed. And for 17 months, his wife Edith Wilson stepped in behind the scenes, screening visitors, controlling paperwork, and effectively running the executive branch.
Yeah, I mean, it's debated how much, some people like to joke she was the first woman president, and some people will push back on that and say, no. But listen, if you control access to the president, you wield a tremendous amount of power. And there are people that speculate she was actually signing papers for him and stuff. We don't really know for sure. It's all speculation, but she definitely did kind of wield some significant power.
All while the public had no idea. But at least that's not as reckless as Warren G. Harding, who gambled away a priceless set of White House china in a hand of poker. 'Cause in a raucous poker night at the White House, Harding wagered china dating back to James Madison. And he lost. His advisors were horrified. But Harding, he just laughed it off. Considering his presidency was rife with corruption, that china was probably the least valuable thing he lost.
That's true, but he was incredibly popular. Probably would have been reelected in 1924 if he hadn't died in office. And left behind what you call a love child. The only actual child he had was one he had with someone who was not married to.
But one thing this next president wasn't going to lose was his pet raccoon. 'Cause in 1926, Calvin Coolidge was sent a live raccoon for Thanksgiving dinner. And instead of eating it, he pardoned the raccoon, named her Rebecca, and made her a White House pet. The First Lady even walked her on a leash around the grounds. Too
Pretty
bad
awesome.
the turkey didn't get that kind of treatment. But believe it or not, the Coolidges weren't as peculiar as the Hoovers, who were intensely private people and spoke Mandarin to each other to confuse eavesdroppers.
That's 100% true. They both knew Mandarin Chinese, and they would speak it so people didn't know what they were saying to each other.
But it went even further. Herbert Hoover hated encountering servants in the hallways, so an elaborate system of bells and signals was installed to warn when the president was approaching. The staff were told to flatten themselves against walls or dive into rooms when he walked by. But while Hoover's staff feared seeing the president, FDR feared seeing something else entirely.
His wife?
The number 13. Because Franklin Roosevelt suffered from triskaidekaphobia, intense fear of the number 13. He refused to travel on the 13th, sit at a table with 13 guests, or launch initiatives on Friday the 13th. This is the same guy who took on Hitler in the Great Depression. But a prime number is where he drew the line.
Yeah.
You know
I hear
what
that.
else has got me shaking my beak? Harry Truman's middle name. Because the S in Harry S. Truman doesn't actually...
I think it actually technically did not have a period after it because it wasn't an abbreviation. It was just an S.
stand for anything. Yeah, it's literally just the letter S, a compromise to honor both grandfathers. And even though you'll often see a period next to it, just remember it's nothing more than one letter.
It shouldn't be.
Kinda weird. Just
Sometimes people would say it was Harry Ship Truman because I think Ship was one of his grandfather's names.
like the bizarre irony of Dwight D. Eisenhower. who grew up in a deeply religious pacifist household that opposed violence.
Yeah.
Yet Ike went on to become one of the most celebrated World War II generals, leading...
But it's important to note, never actually saw combat, never commanded troops directly in combat, always had a staff position.
The Allied invasion of Normandy and defeating Nazi Germany. From pacifist roots to defeating Hitler.
And his birth name was David Dwight Eisenhower, and it got flipped at some point in his childhood.
About a plot twist. But speaking of twists and turns, let's talk about John F. Kennedy's love life. Because this president wasn't just a leader, he was a full-on womanizer.
Yep.
He had affairs with celebrities, interns, and even spies. Like Ellen Romesh, a stunning socialite who had ties to East German intelligence. Or Marilyn Monroe, who delivered a sultry Happy Birthday, Mr. President performance at...
Anybody who watches that and can't immediately tell there was something going on with those two, I don't know what to say.
Madison Square Garden. Or even a 19-year-old White House intern who JFK seduced in her first week.
Really?
This man was an
animal. We are talking about Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, and that was going on? I had no idea about the intern thing.
Oh, poor Jackie. But you know who else deserves sympathy? Lyndon B. Johnson's staff. Because LBJ had no concept of personal boundaries.
Nope.
He held meetings while sitting on the toilet, door wide open.
And fun fact, he actually literally was only alive to be president because he had to go to the bathroom. During World War II, he was a naval officer and was supposed to go on a mission where he was going to be in one of the planes on an attack run in the Pacific. It was a bomber. And he actually had to go to the bathroom while they were waiting to take off, and he got out and went to the bathroom. And when he came back, somebody had taken his spot on that plane as an observer, so he got on a different plane. And the plane that he got on, that he was originally on and had to leave because of the bathroom break, ended up getting shot down.
And he would even relieve himself outdoors in front of staff, reporters, and Secret Service. Sir, can you put that away, please? Gross. At least Richard Nixon added something cool to the White House. Cause in 1969, Nixon had a private one-lane bowling alley installed underneath the building. He'd sneak down late at night in his suit to bowl and clear his head. And his high score? Over 200.
Nice.
But after Nixon resigned, Gerald Ford was sworn into office, making him the only person to serve as both vice president and president without ever being elected. Cause Nixon appointed Ford as VP when Spiro Agnew resigned. And when Watergate took down Nixon, Ford moved up again. Woo-hoo! Unelected, but fully constitutional.
Yep.
Talk about being in the right place at the right time. But speaking of
and Ford played college football at a university that shall not be named.
Presidential anomalies, did you know that Jimmy Carter saw a UFO? Cause in 1969, Carter witnessed a strange green light and filed an official report. During his 1976 campaign, he promised to declassify government UFO files, but Cold War pressures changed his mind.
This is a common thing. Presidents make promises before they become president, then they become president, and they find out things they didn't know when they weren't president, and they go back on their promises.
Remains the only U.S. president to formally report a UFO sighting. But while Carter was searching for UFOs, Ronald Reagan was making movies. Cause before politics, Reagan appeared in over 50 films. But one of his most heroic roles came before the cameras, when he was a young lifeguard and saved 77 people from drowning over 7 summers.
And this was something that when people would come to the Oval Office, he would actually talk about and point out. And he had things that he had mementos from that time, and was very, very proud of that.
After each rescue, he carved a notch into a wooden log, which he proudly brought into the Oval Office when he became president. But Reagan wasn't the only adventurous president, because George H.W. Bush took birthday parties to new heights.
Yeah.
When celebrating his 75th, 80th, 85th, and 90th birthdays, Bush jumped out of airplanes over his house in Maine.
That's so awesome.
Just because you're an old guy, you don't have to sit around drooling in the corner.
And he was the youngest Navy pilot in World War II, was shot down as a Navy pilot. There's famous footage of him being pulled out of the water by a submarine during World War II.
Which is great, because sitting is exactly what got him into trouble overseas. In 1992, Bush vomited on the Japanese Prime Minister during a state dinner, inspiring the Japanese slang bushusuru to do the Bush thing. So while skydiving might be risky, at least it's safer than sushi with diplomats. And speaking of high-risk presidents, we can't forget about Bill Clinton, who had a 2-year affair with White House intern Monica Lewinsky, famously denying it. "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." Well, he did. Can you be a little less creepy, Bill? Like George W. Bush, who managed to avoid affairs, scandals, and even flying shoes. 'Cause in 2008...
That's kind of an epic moment when that guy threw a shoe at him and he dodged it.
An Iraqi journalist hurled both shoes at Bush during a Baghdad press conference. Bush dodged him like a pro and cracked, "All I can report is that it was a size 10. Nice reflexes for a commander-in-chief.
The best, though, moment like that I can think of, after Ronald Reagan was shot, he was speaking at an event and a balloon popped and it was like a bang, like, it sounded like a gunshot. And without missing a beat, he goes, "Missed me," and then kept on giving his speech.
But like Bush's reaction time, Obama had some athleticism of his own.
Yeah.
'Cause he converted the White House tennis court into a basketball court and hosted pickup games against NBA stars like LeBron James and Kobe Bryant.
Listen, if I was president, I totally would have done the same thing, even though they would have wrecked me.
Famously competitive with his smooth left-handed jump shot. Even his staffers were trying not to get dunked on by the POTUS. But the athletic streak doesn't stop with Obama, because Donald Trump is the only president enshrined in the WWE Hall of Fame. As a longtime wrestling fan, Trump hosted WrestleMania events at his Atlantic City casino. And at WrestleMania 23, he stepped into the ring, tackled Vince McMahon, and shaved his head clean in front of a roaring crowd. And finally, we got Joe Biden, whose political career spans over 50 years. Sadly, it started under tragic circumstances.
Yeah.
After winning his first Senate race,
He was 29 years old. He wasn't even legally old enough to take office when he was elected. But you can be elected as long as you're 30 by the time you take office as a senator.
Wife and daughter were killed in a car accident, and his 2 young sons were critically injured.
Yeah.
Biden became one of the only senators to be sworn in from a hospital room. And decades later, he became president. The ultimate comeback arc.
Give him a lot of credit. What an unbelievably tragic set of circumstances, and yet he rose above it. And he actually considered not taking his seat, and he was talked into following through, and then had a long, successful career after that.
And there you have it. Every U.S. president's most bizarre fact.
That was really good. I think he covered it well. I thought he had good nuance and a good variety of interesting facts, and not necessarily all the same ones that people constantly put out there. Some of them are common, but a lot of them weren't, and I learned a few things. So I thought that was really well done, and I'm happy to recommend that channel. I'll be curious to see what else he has, and if there's another video that he has you think I should check out, let me know. Thanks for watching.